Hey, my name is ShawNshawN. I do art on ShawNshawN.co and Special Anyway. Today we're going to review Rhythm Section. So this is a film by Reed Morano. It's an hour and 49 minutes, a little bit over the hour and a half, but I think for kind of a spy, multiple locations kind of film, it's going to be a little longer. You have Blake Lively as Stephanie Patrick, this girl that's been traumatized by her family's death. Jude Law plays Bees, kind of ex-MI6. Sterling K. Brown plays Mark Serra. He's ex-CIA, kind of an information dealer at this point. Daniel Mays plays Dean West, the journalist. So the story is this girl, she's addicted to drugs. She's being a prostitute. Then all of a sudden, one day, this journalist knocks on her door and says, "Hey, I know your family died." And she's like, "Leave me alone. I don't want to know about it." And he said, "No, actually, the plane crash your family was on was actually made up. It's false. It was actually a hit job." And she's like, "What?" First she doesn't believe him, then she calls him back, goes over to his house, sees he has all this information. He's been tracking all the passengers, trying to figure out what's behind the plane crash. And then she talks to him and she's like, "Oh, well, how do you know all this? What's your research? How do you prove this?" She says, "Oh, this one guy is the one that was the bomber, but we're trying to figure out who's behind the bombing." They don't know yet. So they don't know who it is behind the bombing. So they decide, she decides to go confront this bomber, and she has a gun and she's going to kill him. And then she doesn't have the balls to do it. And then all of a sudden her bag's stolen. So she's just completely incompetent. She goes back to the apartment. The journalist has been shot. And then her only lead is really this source that's called B. So she goes up in the middle of Scotland, runs into this guy B. It turns out he's ex-MI6, and he's like, he kind of admits to being the source after a while. She's like, "I want to kill him. I want you to train me." And he's like, "All right." So he reluctantly, first they fight, and then he decides to train her. He kind of trains her with swimming, running, shooting guns. So they do a little bit of preliminary work there. And then she kind of goes off to kill the bomber and then the guy behind the bomber, right? So that's kind of the crux of the story. The ratings on this were about 30-40% on Rotten Tomatoes, so really poorly rated film. Visually, I think it was pretty satisfying. They did some really cool camera effects with the car chase scenes. Instead of doing an outside shot, it's more inside the car, so you feel claustrophobic. You feel like you're the passenger or maybe the driver. So it's really that really nice sense of being chased. You don't have any of the outside logic of, I can look around the corner, I see the cars coming, like they do in, say, a James Bond film. You're actually the driver, you're behind these closed doors, cars appear out of nowhere, carts jump out in front, you run over stuff, trying to get away, people are knocking you out, people are trying to kill you. So they have a really nice car sequence, I think, from a film perspective. They have a lot of different locations, so it's kind of a cool aspect. They're in Marseille, they're in Madrid, they're kind of all over the place, so that's kind of a fun feel to a spy movie. I think one of the flaws is as they go to different places, instead of just showing like she gets in a plane and then she shows up at a big sign that says Marseille, they put text Marseille on top, so it just kind of cuts the movie closer, but it's just kind of lame if you have to actually introduce. It's like in Star Wars where they put the names of the planet. You're like, no, you don't have to do that, dude. There's no logic behind that. You just show the planet and it's a different planet than we've seen before. We know it's a different planet, right? So you should really show it visually, have the characters talk about it. You don't have to say it's Marseille. Just show it somehow that it is Marseille. That's very typical of Marseille, either the sign Marseille or maybe a typical food from Marseille. You're in France. I think this could have made it a little more interesting, and they do this on several sets. They say it's Madrid, and you're like, why is it Madrid? Some of those connections on the sets are a little loose as well. You don't know why the hit jobs take place in certain cities and all this, so that's kind of like all over the place, I think, with the plot a little bit. Another thing I think they really kind of skip, which they really probably should have had in Act 1. So probably Act 1 should have been her grief, the stage, denial, becoming a drug addict. Act 2 should have been kind of her training. She meets this guy, starts training, and then Act 3 is she's the killer, right? And so that would have been pretty much the story, and they kind of cut this grief down to just she being an addict and have a couple of flashbacks, which I guess they're trying to save time. But what they should have done, I think, is shown her as a student. She gets admitted to school, and then she's going to go on this school vacation with her parents, and they actually show her at the airport. I don't want to go. Goes to the airport, and their parents fly off, and then when they're coming back home with the wedding ring, his dad's wedding ring, and then she physically sees either the plane blow up or she gets news over the airport, and a little bit of chaos there. It could have been like 5 minutes of film, literally. And I think that would have made a much stronger Act 1. You'd really feel the grief. Her going to the funeral as well, standing by the bodies of all her brother, her sister, her mom, her dad, and just having 4 there. And then maybe someone say, what are you going to do now? And she'd be like, oh, I don't know, or something. And then she goes into drug addiction. You're like, wow, that makes more sense, right? Obviously, you get the connection. If someone tells you her parents are killed, you're like, oh, she's probably traumatized. But they don't show the traumatized. I think that would have been a much stronger act one. And the way they cover it is they kind of have flashbacks of her last scene with their parents around the house before they go on a flight, which is fine. They can have a little bit of that. But I think they overly use that. The shots of the funeral, the shots of the actual plane crash and her reaction would have been much stronger kind of flashbacks, I think. I think as far as, the character arc, it's okay. Again, like they chop off the beginning where she's good, bad, and then they just started her as a bad character, right? That she's a drug addict. And if they would have started slowly before that and then her transition, suddenly into drug addiction, or they could have said 6 months later she's a drug addict. You're like, all right, I get that. That would have been kind of a stronger sequence, I think. And then she's like a junkie, she's trained, and then she's kind of a half-assed assassin, and then at the end she knows what she's doing. I think they do okay, but in every scenario she's kind of fumbling around, not really doing well as an assassin, which makes sense. She's a junkie. She's not she didn't go to MI6 for 3 or 4 years. She didn't go to CIA. She didn't work for the KGB. She didn't have official training. She just kind of trained by this one guy on the side for a couple of weeks. So obviously she's not going to be as strong as she should be, but I think she would have gotten better a little bit over the time. They could have shown that a little more maybe professional. I think it is realistic the way she is shot, because she just wouldn't do well, I think. She doesn't have the physical strength and all that. Another flaw, I think, in a James Bond film, there's always kind of this villain, and then there's some motive, like maybe he's a news guy and he wants to change the world and he becomes evil or something. But there's some motive behind the villain. Here, we don't really know why the villain. It's kind of this bomber, he builds bombs, and then he does a suicide bombing in the end. So you have these 2 bombings. You don't really know why. He's not really religious, supposedly, so you're like, why would he even bother? Why would this suicide girl sign up for someone that's a-religious? Wouldn't it be like someone that's highly religious drive that to be, some kind of fanatic? It doesn't have to be religion per se, but there has to be some kind of fanaticism for why she would become a suicide bomber in this one scene. And you're like, why would this character become a suicide bomber? It's not really covered as well either. And then it turns out they reveal the villain at the end, the guy behind the scenes. And there's like kind of this fine thread connection, but it doesn't seem like, what's his motive? Why did he have that plane originally brought down? Why did he drive this suicide bombing? You're just like, I don't know. It's not really clear. And again, that's kind of fumbling with the villain. You have to have a strong villain to really fall in love with the lead. Like, obviously she has a great motive. Her family was killed. They don't show it, which would have been better. But they have kind of this great motive. And then you're like, the villain, you're like, who knows what his motive is, just making money or something. You're like, come on, that has to be more than that. I mean, I think the way they shot the killing is realistic in the sense like she's untrained and then she's trained really quickly over a couple weeks and then she becomes this half-assed kind of assassin. And so that's realistic, and I think that's kind of how Assassin would really play out, because you just wouldn't be good at it at first, and it would take a while until you become a stone hard killer. So they kind of established that, but I don't know if it's satisfying as kind of a moviegoer. You want to have kind of escapism. You want to have kind of this glamorous, like, kill everyone kind of effect, like Sean Connery or something like that. It's more fun. Or even Salt with Angelina Jolie. I think she's like this kick-ass freaking badass. You don't really necessarily want to see this weak character. And it's fine if she starts as a weak character, but she should become stronger, I think. And she does become somewhat stronger, but it's unbelievable. She's always a skinny, lanky girl, and you're like, come on, she doesn't know anything. Why would she be any kind of kick-ass? So I'm not sure, shooting it realistically, how you would actually probably be an assassin with a little bit of training is kind of the best way to shoot the film per se. And also the connection with the villain, again, with the character, you don't know why he kills, what's the connection. She kind of unravels it, but it just seemed threadbare to me. It wasn't a clear-cut connection with the villain and what his motive was, and there has to be a villain motive to counter the good. The good has to have a bad, and if the bad is just kind of like, I kill people for a living, I do it for whatever, you're like, it doesn't hold water per se. You really need this kind of yin and yang, especially like, that's why Star Wars is such a good movie. The goody goods are really good, like Luke, and then you have kind of the shady Han Solo, and then you have Darth Vader, like, oh my god, this guy's freaking horrible. And so they're really, the crux of those characters is really good hopeful versus this terrible dictator, and then Emperor later, which is even worse. And all those characters kind of combine the good versus evil, and here you have kind of a wishy-washy, washed up character. They don't know how she got there. I mean, you see how she got there, they tell you, but they don't show it. So that could have been stronger. And the villains are just kind of like, we kill for money and that's it. And you're just like, Really? You're freelance killers? I don't know. That doesn't make sense to me. Not that there's freelance killers, but you have to play the characters a little more cold-hearted, I think. Like Bruce Willis when he plays, I don't remember what character he plays, but he plays kind of this hardcore serial hitman, and he's just hardcore to the core. And that's a really good portrayal. You know, he's doing it for money. He's clocking money. He's going to get out. And so you see this kind of motive, like he wants to get out of the game. He has a lot of money. He's stacking up. In this case, you just don't get any motive behind the villain. So they lack that drive either monetarily, fanaticism. There's some huge organization behind him. He's seeking revenge himself in some twisted way. There's just none of that. So overall, I think they could have done better with the villain, could have done better with the start of the girl. Some of the action sequences are really fun. My dad liked it, so maybe it's not that bad. I don't think it was that bad either. I think 30-40% is kind of harsh. I might have gave it 60-70%. I'm not going to say it's definitely not a 1917 for sure at all. But, you know, camera-wise, it was kind of interesting. All the sets were kind of fun and different shot, but it doesn't totally come together as a film, I think. So I would say it's entertaining. I'm not going to buy it, obviously. If you want to subscribe, you can subscribe below. And I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.